So, fiat money is not money that is used to buy little Italian cars. Fiat money is money that is what we call legal tender. It's created by law. So, your money, if you pull a dollar bill out of your pocket or a 10 or a 100 or whatever you've got, it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. What that means is if I owe you $10 and I give you a $10 bill, by law, our debt is settled. And if you try to take me to court and say I haven't settled up the debt because I gave you this piece of paper, the law says that, in fact, I have settled up our debt because I gave you that $10. Okay? The money is required to be taken by law, and you have to pay your taxes in U.S. currency, and that adds ambiance to the currency. It makes it more likely that other people are going to accept that currency. You actually don't have to take pennies. The law does not require you to take pennies. So if I owe you $100 and I give you 10,000 pennies, you can refuse. But otherwise, you have to take my money because it's the law. All right. This again comes back to the F word, to faith. We believe in our money. We trust that our money is still going to be good tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that. And as long as we do that, it doesn't matter whether our money is a piece of paper or a chunk of gold. We trust that it's going to retain its value, and therefore it works. All right? So basically the whole universe is on fiat money systems now. There aren't countries out there that are requiring you to pay in gold and silver. I should note, as an aside, if you're really bored, go read your Constitution, because I know nobody... certainly nobody in Congress or the Washington seems to ever read their Constitution. But the Constitution actually specifically requires that you pay your state taxes in gold and silver coin. But the Supreme Court said, so we don't have to pay our debts in gold and silver coin. And again, faith. What matters in our financial system is our faith. If we have faith in the financial system, it works. When we lose our faith in the financial system, then our financial system falls apart. We have to believe. We have to get down on our knees at night and believe in the financial system. And when we do, everything will work just fine. How much money is there? Well, it turns out that all kinds of different kinds of money thingies. And so we need to specify a couple definitions of we're going to count this as money and not count that as money. And so, okay? Remember again, there's functions of money, right? So credit cards aren't money because they don't do those things. Okay? You can argue that Bitcoin isn't really money, that Bitcoin is just an asset that some people trade. All right? Money, one of the things about money is this medium of exchange. For it to really do that well, money has to be what we call liquid. Liquid means easy to spend. So my house has value, but I can't really take it to the grocery store and spend it. I would have to convert it into some other form, and then I could take that other form of money and take it to the grocery store, right? I'm not going to be able to take a brick out of my wall and go take that to the grocery store and buy groceries, right? Because I can say, hey, my house is worth this much, and that's 1/1,000,000th of my house, and therefore that's worth, because it's not. Okay? So we have two basic definitions of money that we use. We used to have a lot more. We don't really use all those lot mores anymore. But we have two basic definitions that we use, and the first one is cleverly called M1. M1 is highly liquid money. M1 is money that's just sitting there ready to spend. So M1 is two things. It's currency. It's coins, bills, all that stuff. And it's all the money that's in checking accounts, checkable deposits. There used to be little stuff in it, but really that little stuff isn't in there anymore. It's basically two things. It's currency and checkable deposits. Okay? So M1 is a total of $5 trillion, just a little over $5 trillion right now. 1.8 trillion of that is in currency, and 3.2 trillion of that is in checking accounts. Okay, really easy to spend, right? You can spend your checking account money easy. You got a little piece of plastic in your wallet. You just go, and you spent it. I would note, when you think, hey, there's a lot of cash out there in the world, no. Of the $1.8 trillion in cash, 1.3 trillion of that is in $100 bills. So if for money less than $100 bills, there's only $500 billion, there's only half a trillion. And most of that, well, a third of that is in 20s, and then it's split. Okay? Most of the big cash denominations, like I said, we used to have these $5,000 bills. Well, bad people use them. Good people don't take a $5,000 bill to the grocery store. But Al Capone, the big criminal guy, he's got to stash his money away somewhere. He wants $5,000 bills to make it easier to stash that money away. So we've got rid of the high denomination bills because they were only being used in criminal activity. And there are federal agencies that think we should get rid of $100 bills because mostly they're used in illegal stuff. You can actually, if you have a briefcase and you stuff it full of $100 bills that have been out in circulation, drug dogs will sniff it out because there'll be so much drug residue in the currency. And we won't go all into this, but the ink on your money takes years to dry. The way they put the ink on, it's a special process that, again, is one of the ways you identify counterfeits is the fancy American, it's not actually American ink, but the fancy ink that's on your bill. Because it's so fluid, it absorbs stuff that's around it. So if you're a drug dealer, your money is absorbing quantities of drugs, and if you put enough money together, drug dogs can sniff it out. Okay? There's people who think we should get rid of currency and go just to debit cards, but I will tell you that when Russia was the Soviet Union, when they were communist, they commissioned a study to figure out how best to control their population, how best the government could control the lives of the people, and their conclusion was to go to a debit card system. Because then the government knows everywhere you are and what you're doing. Everything you buy, everything you do, and everywhere you are, the government has a record of. Okay? So, maybe not with the currency-less society. M2. M2 is all that liquid money in M1 plus some less liquid stuff. So savings accounts. It's shocking how much money people have in savings accounts that aren't earning any interest. Then we have what are called small denomination time deposits. Most people call those a CD, a certificate of deposit. That's when you give your money to the bank for a set amount of time. You agree not to take your money out for a year or 2 years or 3 years. Small in the government's definition is under $100,000. And then we have what are called money market mutual funds. That's when lots of a company like Vanguard pools together a bunch of money from lots of people and puts it into bonds or puts it into stocks or puts it out somewhere. Okay? M2's $18 trillion. So M1 is $5 trillion. That means savings accounts and small time deposits, mutual funds, things that normal people are saving their money in that aren't usually huge amounts of, right, $100,000 or smaller here. Those kind of accounts are $13 trillion. So we, American citizens, we've got $13 trillion stuffed away in our savings accounts and small time deposits and mutual funds. Cool. Okay. Economists disagree over which one of these two is a better indicator of what's going on in the world. And we might talk about that some more. All right. So we want to talk old school, new school here. And so that's actually the first graduation ever at UNLV. If you haven't seen the pictures of it, that's a picture from the very first graduation at UNLV, which was called Nevada Southern at that point. It was NSU. All right. So if you read your book is old school. Even though it was just updated like 6 months ago, It's already way out of date. And that's what happens when you take macro. When you take micro, it's still like it's 1850 in your micro class. But in your macro class, it's changing all the time. It's way more fun. Macro is way more fun than micro. So let's ask a couple questions and see where we are. You take your money. You get paid $1,000. You get a check from the government for $1,000. And you go put it in the bank. Who owns it when you put it in the bank? Well, it turns out that there's this thing called the common law. Common law is the laws that we have that aren't written down. Okay? So we have all these laws, and it's 40 states of the United States. British common law is the common law that applies. In 9 states, it's Spanish common law, Nevada being one of those states. And in 1 state, Louisiana, it's French common law. And most of the time that doesn't affect you, but for example, how property gets split up in a divorce is dependent upon the common law that exists in that state. So in British common law, you split everything 50-50. In Spanish common law states, you keep what you get to take back everything that was yours before you got married. And then you split the gains after you were married. So different. In the common law, when you put your money in your bank, you're actually transferring ownership of the money to the bank and becoming a creditor. So you put that $1,000 in the bank now owns that $1,000. It's their $1,000, not your $1,000. And they owe you $1,000. So putting $1,000 into your bank account is legally not very different from you selling $1,000 in paper clips to the bank. There's differences like the paperclip sale isn't federally insured, and the money you put in the bank, the fact that the bank owes you that money is federally insured probably. But you don't actually own those deposits. Why is that important? Well, if you give a friend of yours, you have a nice recliner, right? And you give that to another person. You give it to your friend, you loan it to your friend for a minute. You say, hey, your friend says, hey, I have an apartment. I just got a new apartment. I don't have any furniture. I can't afford any furniture. And so you give them a recliner you have that you're not using. Okay, here's a recliner. And you say to your friend, that's really, I love my recliner. I need that back by football season. So I'm just loaning it to you till you can get your own furniture. All right? Your friend cannot legally sell that recliner or rent it out to somebody else. It's still yours, right? And if you go ask for it, technically it's still yours. They have to give it back to you. Your bank owns the money. So your bank can take your money and do whatever they want to with it within legal. So your bank can loan your money out to somebody else because it's not your money. It's their money. If you retained ownership of that money once it went into the bank, then the bank would not be able to loan it out to somebody else. But that's not what happens. The bank becomes the owner of the money, legally speaking, and the bank then can loan out that money. All right. Now the bank, if it's got any brains at all, does not loan out every bit of money that it has. It doesn't open up one morning and go, hey, there's no money in the bank. All right? People are going to come in and ask for money. Stuff's going to happen. The bank needs to have some money. And people are using their debit cards, and that means money has to flow between banks. We got to have some money for it to flow. So the bank keeps some of the money that people put in it inside the bank. It can keep it in the bank, or it can give it to the Federal Reserve. We'll talk about them in a minute. We give it to the Federal Reserve to hold for us. All right? That money is called a reserve. So if I'm holding it in the bank, if it's in my vault in case I need it, or if I'm having the Federal Reserve hold it in case I need it, that money is called a reserve. All right. Now, why old school, new school? Well, up until March of 2020, so up until March 2020, we operated what was called a fractional reserve banking system. And what that means is that banks had to sit down, add up all their relevant deposits, and then multiply that deposit times a fraction that the Federal Reserve gave them. And they had to keep that amount of money in the bank. And that's how we decided how much money the bank had to keep, was this fairly simple process of, I have $1 billion in deposits. The Fed says I have to keep 10% of that, so I have to keep $100 million in the bank. Okay? That system, fractional reserve, right? So it's a fraction. If I have to keep 1/10, I have $1 billion times a tenth is $100 million. That's what I have to keep. That system probably worked pretty well in the old days when banks didn't have all this stuff going on. In the modern world, banks have invented all kinds of new kinds of accounts and things. It's not just people walking in, putting their money in the bank, and then, the bank making loans for, cars and stuff. What banks do now is very complex. And banks need a lot of flexibility to deal with a world that's changing constantly. This fractional reserve system doesn't have any flexibility in it, and it doesn't allow for the fact that some banks are engaged in far more riskier or interesting obligations than other banks. So two identical banks that have the same deposits, one of them might have taken on far more risk than the other, and yet the old system, the fractional reserve system, basically says they all have to keep the same amount of reserves. Okay? So we abandoned this system. We abandoned it. Just like we abandoned little tiny graduation in black robes.